The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, what progressive Democrats need to do now to regain the white working class vote. Plus, inside the movement for a national popular vote and the difference it could make. And Bill Press talks about what the midterms tell us about who could run and win in the next race for president. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Justin Guest has written extensively about our nation's white working class voters. He says that Democrats still have a long way to go to regain the ground they've lost to Donald Trump. And we say hello to Justin Guest, an assistant professor of public policy at George Mason University. His teaching and research interests include comparative politics, immigration, and demographic change. He's also the author of White Working Class, What Everyone Needs to Know. Justin Guest, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
My pleasure, Jim.
Nice to have you with us. For many election watchers, this midterm was a test for the Democrats to see if they could expand their appeal, or some would even argue regain their appeal, towards white working class voters. What's your sense about how they did, not just with white working class voters, but overall?
Well, I'm actually not sure that many Democrats thought of this election as a test, because they didn't try very hard to actually appeal to white working class voters. So it was going to be unlikely that they actually succeeded in appealing to them. I think that the test was whether they were going to be able to appeal to white working class voters without exerting very much energy or adapting their message and platform. But that simply didn't work out.
Did they not learn from 2016?
Well, I'm not sure that all Democrats agree on what they should have learned from 2016. There is a substantial number of Democrats who believe that, in 2016 there really wasn't all that much that went wrong, because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, and with demographic change going the way it is, the principal demographics inside of the Democratic coalition will only broaden with time. And if you just keep waiting a little longer, eventually they'll all be Democrats, and they'll have a very impenetrable majority. But that could take about 10 or 20 more years. For another constituency, I think they were perturbed by the sort of jettisoning of white working class people over the last 20 years. And really, the rates of support amongst that constituency have fallen significantly. And they've all gone to the Republican Party, or just began sitting out. And for those folks, yeah, I think that that is a concern, because that is a lesson that they learned, is that the Democrats can hardly be a national party with a message that only appeals to people on the coasts or in larger urban metropolises.
You're a professor, so I'll ask you to kind of grade overall how that election went for Democrats, A to F.
Well, even as a professor with grading, it's very dependent on our expectations. I think that if Democrats are expecting a blue wave, which I know is what many of them were hoping for, this certainly wasn't it. They did sufficiently to turn one of the houses, which is what they needed to do in order to keep the president or make the president more accountable to an opposition. And so they were able to do that with the House. But without being able to turn the Senate, which was going to be difficult given the number of seats that the Democrats had to defend, it's not truly a blue wave, and so probably I guess you're coming around about a B or a B minus, if those were what your expectations were. If you had lower expectations because of the Senate's structure, then I think the Democrats did well in the House. They won a lot of seats in places that were unlikely to go to them previously, and they obviously were able to create a decent majority with a solid margin.
Are there any particular races that stand out as significant, maybe even surprising?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there was going to be a blue wave, and if the country was going to be more resistant, or at least resilient, and more skeptical of the politics of division that was coming from the White House's focus on the migrant caravan and on other divisive social issues, then I think you would have seen states like Texas flip, and Beto O'Rourke, who's a very strong candidate, could have won perhaps, and then Bill Nelson or Andrew Gillum could have won in Florida. But these are states that are face-to-face with immigration, and I think what's clear is that the fear-mongering it resonated amongst a lot of the Republican voters there, and perhaps with some independents as well, to actually prevent Democrats from taking very valued seats, and in the case of Nelson's seat, keeping it.
We're speaking with Justin Guest, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University. He's also the author of White Working Class, What Everyone Needs to Know. Justin, if we look very closely at the states where Democrats made advances, such as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, is this more about the Democrats figuring out a way to regain these voters, or is it about Trump losing them?
I actually think it's about neither. I think it's about turnout. I think that Democrats were, relative to a midterm election, highly mobilized this time. And that made a very big difference because they really did not have a strong turnout relative to Republicans in 2016 in the upper Midwest. I think Hillary Clinton excited very few of those upper Midwest voters with whom I spent a lot of time and studied very closely. I think, from a white working class person's perspective, if you're living around the Rust Belt region, it was the choice was actually quite clear. Hillary Clinton represented more of the same, and that meant, really the sort of drifting of white working class and Rust Belt constituencies to the fringes of American society and to an uncertain future. Whereas with Donald Trump, he represented a gamble, but certainly a shaking of the establishment and the status quo. And, in that part of the world, the recession didn't begin in 2007. It began in 1977. And in that part of the world, they haven't had a whole lot of good news or a lot of politicians that have really taken their interests to heart. Many of them have, given it a lot of lip service, standing in front of shuttered factories every 4 years or so. But that doesn't mean that actually the results have followed. Donald Trump was a gamble, and for many of them, they're waiting to see whether or not he pays off.
Mm-hmm. Now, the white working class has certainly received a great deal of attention since 2016. Thanks in part to your work and many others. But what more do we understand about them now, and how does that translate into politics?
Well, I think we understand where they're coming from. I mean, certainly, I've written 2 books on this group of people, The White Working Class, What Everyone Needs to Know, which you very kindly mentioned, but also The New Minority. And in The New Minority, I authors like myself and others, we are kind of pushing back against the perception of white working class people as being somehow irrational and voting against their interests. What we see is that it is in their interest to shake things up because of the sense of desperation that they're feeling right now. And what we understand better about them is that they're very nostalgic for earlier times and very discomforted and uncertain about the future. And so they're consumed by that nostalgia and really by a feeling that they are out of control, that they no longer are in the driver's seat of the country that they feel like they once defined. And so that sense of estrangement and fear has been very mobilizing. And I think that the Democratic Party has been very cautious and frankly afraid themselves of touching into the politics of heritage and tapping into the politics of nostalgia without offending members of their base and their constituencies. And so as a result, they've really done very little to try to regain the support of a constituency that was once their unionist backbone.
I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying the Democrats really don't know what to do as far as trying to bring back the working white class.
They definitely don't, but that's not news. I mean, I don't think, to be fair, the Republicans didn't really know what to do with this group of people for the last 20 years either. For the last 20, 30 years, the Republicans could connect with many white working class people on the basis of social conservatism, but they really feared the sort of economic populism of many white working class people. On the Democratic side, they could get along with the economic populism, but they were terrified of the social conservatism. And so both parties and their caucuses kind of kept their distance from the white working class, particularly in the upper Midwest. They basically kept their distance and sort of treated them like a tiger in a circus ring, where you kind of visit every 4 years and otherwise you stay the heck away, because you're really not sure how to fit them into the coalition and the ideological platform that you're building. Donald Trump changed all that because he basically embraced the social conservatism and used a lot of economically populist rhetoric that has yet to really been followed with meaningful policy changes, with the exception of trade deals and the cancellation thereof. And so he has basically engaged white working class people's principal ideas in the most meaningful way, at least rhetorically, in another generation.
Mm-hmm. And I think underscore rhetorically there, because that's at this point that's the only advancement we've made for the white working class
from an economic perspective, But
right.
When people talk about how Trump has done so little, it's true. He has no legislative accomplishments to speak of, with the exception of these gigantic corporate and millionaire tax cuts. However, by executive action, he's taken a lot of action on social policy matters as it relates to immigration, and that is something that does connect with many white working class people's fear of the demographic change that's before us. And so, it's a tightrope walk to really understand how white working class people are understanding their interests in the 21st century.
Now, moving ahead to 2020, what kind of policies should Democrats pursue that can further their connection with this community? Is it as simple as economic populism, which you mentioned a moment ago?
In many parts of the country, that could certainly help, and the Democrats are now in a position in the House to actually put a little bit of pressure on the White House to actually put their money where their mouth was. So in 2016, Donald Trump floated a number of economically populist ideas that actually would probably be palatable to the Democratic caucus, and they could use the House in the next 2 years to pass a number of bills that would put pressure on Republicans to actually fulfill those promises. But beyond that, there are a lot of stylistic differences as well. The Democrats could do more to actually embrace some of the heritage politics without necessarily getting into this horrible innuendo and sort of racial resentment. They can actually simply appreciate the fact that people's lives have been changed by globalization, and that looking backwards, that there were simpler times for many people, and that there is a sort of sense of stability that has been lost. Some kind of empathy for that would actually go a long way, and I think the Democrats have hesitated to do that because it doesn't necessarily jive with the sort of progressivism that they normally want to exude. But there's nothing mutually exclusive about honoring the good aspects of the past while defining and pushing forward into the future. So, actually embracing white working class descriptive representation, meaning you actually run white working class candidates on down ballot races and statewide races where available, would go a long way to communicate that message. To actually embrace this group of people not as deplorables, but actually as proud Americans with clear interests that actually don't look that different from the racial minorities that otherwise populate the Democratic caucus. Because really at their core, there are a number of key political issues and matters that transcend the social boundaries between working class minority groups and white working class people. Some of those include access to good education, no matter what your income is, the relief of debt, particularly student debt, access to good medical care. These are all matters that actually really are independent of one's ethnic background.
It is going to be an interesting couple of years for sure. Justin Guest, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. as mentioned, the author of White Working Class, What Everyone Needs to Know. Justin, we appreciate your time with us today and look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Anytime. Thanks, Jim.
You're quite welcome. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure,
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Coming up next, an encore interview on the movement for a national popular vote and why it's the right choice for America now. But first, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
It's Cyber Monday. Get out there and buy stuff. But you don't actually have to go anywhere, for this gimmicky shop, shop, shop day lures us to consume without leaving home or even getting out of bed. Concocted by Amazon, the online marketing monopolist, Cyber Monday is a knockoff of Black Friday. Just another ploy by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos to siphon sales from real stores. Seems innocent, but behind Amazon's online convenience and discounted prices is a predatory business model based on exploitation of workers, bullying of suppliers, dodging of taxes, and use of crude anti-competitive force against America's Main Street businesses. A clue into Amazon's ethics came when Bezos instructed his staff to get ever-cheaper prices from small business suppliers by stalking them, quote, the way a cheetah would pursue a sickly gazelle. Jeff Crandall, who owns Old Town Bike Shop in Colorado Springs, is one who's under attack. He offers fair prices, provides good jobs, pays rent and taxes, lives in and supports the community. But he's noticed that more and more shoppers come in to try out bikes and get advice, yet not buy anything. Instead, their smartphones scan the barcode of the bike they want, then they go online to purchase it from Amazon cheaper than Crandall's wholesale price. You see, the cheetah is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year beast that can sell that bike at a loss, then make up the loss on sales of the thousands of other products it peddles. This is Jim Hightower saying this amounts to corporate murder of small business. And yes, it's illegal, but Amazon is doing it every day in practically every community. So on this Cyber Monday, let's pledge to buy from local businesses that support our communities. For information, go to American Independent Business Alliance at www.amiba.net.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor. All for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. As it stands now, the 2018 midterms popular vote went overwhelmingly in favor of Democrats in the House, with a margin not seen since 1974. And, once again, that did not necessarily translate into electoral wins. In an encore interview, our next guest says it's time to value all votes equally, and why a national popular vote for president is the way to do it. And we say hello to Karen Hobert Flynn, who's the president of Common Cause, one of several organizations supporting the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure to have you with us. So let's start with the basics. What is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact?
So first, I should say that the current system has the candidate, we would expect the candidate with the most popular votes to be elected president, just like every other election. But unfortunately, that is not the way our system works. Electing the president is not done that way. The current system uses the electoral college, where electors select who's going to be president. And the challenge is that states are given the authority of how they allocate those votes. Most states, 48 states, allocate those based on a winner-take-all strategy of who wins the popular vote in that state. What happens is that we don't have the winner of the popular vote across the country electing the president. And so what happens as a result of that is we see candidates really just focusing most of their time and energy campaigning in states where they're battleground states that can make a big difference. And so we have had in our history 5 different times when the candidate who placed second in the popular vote elected as president. Once in 2016, so that was just very recently, in 2000, in 1888, 1876, and 1824. And so 5 of the last 12 presidential elections, we could see also if we shifted a handful of votes in 1 or 2 states, we could have also elected the second place candidate. And so it disenfranchises voters in more than 2/3 of the states who don't live in these battleground states. Mm-hmm. The presidential candidates don't really have reason to visit or poll or advertise or organize in most states. And so just in 2016 alone, we saw 68% of the campaign visits were in just 6 states. And they 2/3 of, or actually 94% of 2016 events were in 12 states. And so that means in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, Michigan, and other battleground states, there's a lot of activity. And most of the other states see no interest from presidential candidates. And in a lot of ways, their votes don't matter in the election of the president. And that isn't really democracy.
And that creates that attitude of my vote doesn't count.
That's right.
There's that part of it.
There is. And, I do think polls show that people believe that the president should be elected by the national popular vote. And there's widespread support of that. But we also see people believe that their votes don't matter. And so 44% of the voting age population didn't vote in the 2016 election. That's a huge portion of our voting age population. And for a democracy, that should not be the way our elections are run.
Absolutely. In a piece that you wrote for the Daily Beast back in 2016, you stated that the National Popular Vote Compact is in keeping with the spirit of our nation's charter, in other words, our Constitution. What did you mean by that?
When we look at even the preamble of the Constitution, we talk about we the people of the United States established the Constitution for the United States of America. And our Constitution rests on the idea of popular sovereignty, that a government in which the people's voice and the people rule. And when we have a system to elect our president that ignores such a huge portion of our population, it's a real problem. NPR did an analysis in 2016, and they found that it's possible to win the Electoral College with just 23% of of the popular vote using the Electoral College. That is an incredibly small portion of the population. And it means that for many other states, 38 states are flyby states. They are states that are ignored. And so that's a real problem for our democracy. And there are ways to fix it. And actually the Interstate Compact, the National Popular Vote Compact, is a way to fix that process. It would...
sorry, please go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It would make all votes equal. It would ensure that the candidate with the most votes win the election, just like in other elections that we have in our country, like the elections for governor. It would bring candidates to every state and make them listen to everyone's concerns, not just those that are in battleground states, which tend to be whiter, more rural. It would give voters in all states, regardless of their party affiliation, an incentive to vote in presidential elections, and, frankly, would help get out the vote in all states and in all elections. And I think that it would really rid the nation of these falsely polarized red and blue election night maps that we see, where we're looking at, how presidential candidates are racking up votes in a red or a blue state to get to the 270 votes they need to win the Electoral College.
I was going to mention that on the Common Cause website, there's a detailed list of the problems with our Electoral College. You were touching on some of that just a second ago. What are some of the other more significant problems with the current Electoral College?
One of the things is that it means that that battleground states get most of the attention. We also see the battleground states, you will see, are more likely to get money when there are federal emergencies, that there are more benefits that accrue to their states because both when candidates are campaigning there and once elected, they're more likely to do favors for battleground states. And so, that is not... it is not a fair system, and it's one that discounts so many people across the country. It means that not every vote is equal, so that most Americans are completely irrelevant in presidential elections. And so that, I think, is a huge problem. And we also see it can impact how people vote. So young adults in swing states are 30% more likely to vote than young people in the rest of the nation. And so it has a real impact on how people participate. So one of the positive things about this is something that we can fix without amending the Constitution. We can use a national popular vote contract, an interstate compact, where states come together and say that they will award their electors to the winner of the national popular vote. And so what that means is that they each pass a state law that enables them to enter into a legally enforceable contractual obligation to allocate their electoral votes to the winners of the national popular vote. And once we get to enough states passing this interstate compact through their legislature and signed by the governor in their state, then when we get to enough states for 270 electoral votes, those votes will be allocated to the winner of the national popular vote, thereby ensuring that we have a national popular vote winner. And so it doesn't abolish the Electoral College. You don't have to amend the Constitution. You just do this compact. And so we've seen 12 states in the District of Columbia pass this interstate compact over the last number of years. So they have 172 electoral votes committed to this National Popular Vote Compact, and they just need 98 more electoral votes for this to become, this interstate compact to be in operation. So that is very exciting, and we've seen bipartisan support moving these kinds of reforms. In fact,
that is so impressive.
It is. Just a few months ago, Connecticut was the latest state to pass the National Popular Vote Compact.
There are, of course, many myths about the national popular vote. One is that smaller states will lose their vote. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's interesting because the popular elections would give small states a bigger voice. So if you look at the smallest states, 12 of the 13 smallest states in the country are actually sidelined in presidential elections as they currently stand because they're not competitive. So Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Alaska, they usually vote Republican, and then Rhode Island, Delaware, Maine, Vermont, Hawaii, and D.C. usually vote Democratic. And so what happens is these are never battleground states, and we don't see presidential candidates going there. And if you took all of those states and the District of Columbia, you would have about 11 million people and 40 electoral votes. And Ohio, which is a battleground state, has about 11 million people also and only 20 electoral votes. But the people in Ohio have significantly more impact because that is a battleground state where presidential candidates spend millions of dollars campaigning. And so they just have much more influence. So if we were to move to National Popular Vote Compact, these smaller states, their votes would matter. And so I think that's really important. And even if you look in large states like Florida, for example, or in Ohio, when presidential candidates go to those states, they travel all over the state. So they're not just going to big cities or a few urban centers. They also go in small, medium, and large towns. So they campaign all over the state. And so if we were to open up the system by passing a National Popular Vote Compact, we would have candidates traveling all over the country because they want to get as many votes as they can of the national popular vote because that's what's going to determine whether they win or not.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it's not like they don't have enough time because we start the process for running for offices now soon after an election occurs, and so we're on to the next election. So they got plenty of time to visit all these different states. Well, another myth is that a national popular vote is an anti-Republican idea. True or not true?
That's not true. It's not true at all. And in fact, we see support for national popular vote and bipartisan support for national popular vote in many of the states that are engaged. In fact, in September, there have been bills introduced, companion bills in the House and Senate in Michigan, and the 25 senators in the state Senate include 15 Republicans and 10 Democrats, and they're supporting national popular vote. Some Republicans believe that our current system benefits Democratic presidents over Republicans. And so that is one of the reasons that they look at it. Many others want to see, people from all across the country in small states and large states that are not battleground states to have their voices heard. So we have seen support for this, across the aisle. I will say that recent elections can sometimes have an impact. So when George W. Bush won in 2000, he lost the popular vote but won the electoral vote. Support for an idea like national popular vote dipped a little. And then as you moved further away from the election, people looked at the actual reform itself and thought less about the election that they had just participated in and saw the real benefits of a national popular vote. And likewise, in 2016, when Donald Trump did the same thing, there was a dip in Republican support shortly after that, but we are starting to see, once again, Republicans and Democrats moving these these national popular vote bills in states across the country.
I mean, it is supposed to be about what the people want, and the president and everybody else that's in offices. I mean, you're representing those people, so you should be listening to those people. And gosh, a national popular vote would certainly take care of that. But of course,
right.
We're not done talking about myths. Perhaps the most pervasive myth is that a national popular vote goes against the Constitution. That can't be true.
It is not true. And in fact, the Constitution squarely says that it is up to the states to decide how to allocate their electors. So this is clearly defined in the Constitution as belonging to the states. And so states at any time can change how they allocate their electors' votes. So we don't have to amend the Constitution. You don't need to abolish the Electoral College. Doing an interstate compact, and there are hundreds of interstate compacts, is a way to fix this problem without having to change the Constitution in any way.
We're speaking with Karen Hobert Flynn, who's the president of Common Cause, and talking today about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Karen, where is the greatest resistance to a national popular vote?
There are some groups on the right that have opposed National Popular Vote Compact, and probably one of the best examples is the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. ALEC has been a secretive collaboration between businesses and conservative politicians where they come together and behind closed doors ghostwrite model bills that they introduce in state capitals across the country. And so their agenda is often pro-business, anti-environmental, and actually anti-reform. So they used to have a committee that focused on putting up barriers to people being able to vote. So, battling online voter registration and automatic voter registration and other reforms that would give people more access to be able to have their voices heard in elections. And so they have an anti-reform agenda, and one of those things was opposing a national popular vote. In some ways, I think that they are less interested in the people's voice in our democracy and more interested in how the wealthy and corporate interest can get more of what they want passed, whether it's gutting minimum wage or getting loopholes for big industries and the super rich. And so I would say that is probably the most powerful and challenging opposition that we faced on this measure.
Your effort is the result of a coalition of organizations calling for the end of the Electoral College. Who are some of the members of this coalition?
It's a terrific coalition, and I would first say National Popular Vote, and if you went to nationalpopularvote.com, you can see it was one of the founding organizations that conceived of this interstate compact, and there's lots of great information, and they track what's happening in states. We also work with Fair Vote, AARP, groups like the Sierra Club, the NAACP, many labor organizations, the Democracy Initiative. There are new groups coming into this issue, too, a new group called Make Every Vote Count. Lots of activists from Indivisible and other groups that are really interested in engaging in these issues as well.
Now, this is hardly the first time Americans have questioned the validity of the Electoral College, and certainly in those two recent elections in 2016 and 2000, it was discussed. What gives you hope that now is the time when change is actually within reach?
What gives me hope is that I have seen more people engaging at this moment in history in issues around democratic structural issues because of the huge challenges we've seen with the 2016 election and the Trump administration. challenging our democratic norms and values and institutions. Many people came out to resist and fight back against that, but also they have wanted to engage in passing reforms that give people stronger voice in their democracy. And so national popular vote has been one of those issues where people that have never been involved before are coming out of the woodwork saying, this is something we need. This is something that needs to pass. And that's what gives me hope. I have never seen this kind of activism, and I've been doing this work for more than 30 years, this kind of activism around democracy. And it's inspiring.
Before we let you go, on the Common Cause website, visitors are asked to sign a letter to their state lawmakers. Tell us what the letter says, and how can listeners find it?
So the letter talks about contacting your member of Congress to say, and your state legislators, and to say, we want you to pass a national popular vote compact. And to link to the letter, you just need to go to www.commoncause.org/NPV, which stands for National Popular Vote. And if you do that, you can sign into the letter and send it to your state legislators. And we hope that you will engage in this very important fight. There are opportunities to move this in a number of state legislatures, and we will be fighting in many states come 2019. Places like Oregon and Delaware, New Mexico, Nebraska, Michigan, Arizona, and many other states. So we hope you'll join us in this fight.
And again, folks, I encourage you to go to commoncause.org/NPV for National Popular Vote to get more information, to get in touch with your state senators and congressmen, and we really need to make this happen. It's long overdue. Karen Hobert Flynn, president of Common Cause, joining us today to talk about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Karen, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back again soon with a positive update, I hope.
Oh, great. I'd love to do that. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Hannah Trudeau, national politics reporter at National Journal, about who may appear on the 2020 ballot for president.
Hey, the 2018 midterm elections are behind us now, and we are already zooming into 2020. We try to hold it off until the midterms, but there's no holding back now. And so we thought we'd take a look at the Democratic field and the Republican field and the chances of a challenge maybe to Donald Trump, what some of the issues might be looking into 2020. And to help us through that today, Hannah Trudeau joins us, who is a staff correspondent covering politics for the National Journal. It's nationaljournal.com. Hannah, how are you? Good to see you.
Good. Thank you for having me.
So, off and running, huh? There's no time in between?
There's no time. No time like the present.
I mean, it is, I saw that I think the debates on the Democratic side are going to start as early as spring 2019.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that they'll have to have many different tiers like they had with the Republican field, potentially a main stage debate and then one or two possibly undercard debates as well, given the size of the field.
Well, I do too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I've said it's going to be the varsity, the JV, and maybe the middle school debate.
Yeah,
I mean, depending
something like that.
on how it is. But, you know, it's just, I think it's, I know there's nothing you can do about it except complain. But as I recall, when John F. Kennedy announced for president, 1960, it was like April of 1960, maybe March or April of 1960.
Yeah.
And, he won the primaries were different then, but he won the primaries or whatever they were in West Virginia and other states where he campaigned, got the nomination at the convention, and was elected president of the United States.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do it for 2 or 3 years. And as I said, starting out here, this conversation, we tried to hold it back until 2018, but a lot of people did not hold back. I mean, there have been people actually out there in Iowa, in New Hampshire, candidates, Republicans, well, particularly Democrats, I guess, for the last year.
Yeah, I would say even almost 2 years, at least a year and a half or so. There's been a flurry of activity going not just to the traditional early battleground states, New Hampshire and Iowa, the early voting states, but sort of new battlegrounds too. And people have started trying out different strategies to see, maybe I can't win Iowa, maybe I can't win New Hampshire, but maybe I can win Colorado or Nevada, and I'll start with that end. So it's been a bunch of different things so far that we've seen.
Right. All right, now let's get one thing out of the way. So Mark Penn, who was the pollster for Bill Clinton, together with Doug Schoen, and then he became Hillary's campaign manager in 2008 when she was running against Barack Obama, is now a Fox News contributor, and he this week said that based on his knowledge of the Clintons, there is no doubt in his mind that Hillary will run again.
Right.
Tell me that's not so. I
think that comment was met with some sort of skepticism at the time, and I think for good reason. But I would go out on a limb and say, and I've said this before on this show, I don't personally think she's going to run again. I guess never say never with the Clintons or just in general. Somebody like Biden might take a third stab at it, so if him, then why not Hillary again type of thing, possibly. But I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that was just him speculating more so than having had a conversation with her directly about it.
Right. I'm not sure that they're on good terms anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears, I don't think I think the last thing we need is another Hillary Clinton campaign. God bless her. She's been a great public servant and has really served this country well in several different positions. But her time
I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a lot of people feel that way too. At least from what the response was when that column came out.
And let's face it, there were not that many people calling on her in 2018 to go out there and
or Bill for what it's worth,
to hold big rallies and raise a lot of money or whip up the base or whatever.
Sure.
So sort of people sort of accepted. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you and goodbye. Right.
Yes.
Okay. On the Republican field, which may be easier to get a hold of, there's no doubt Donald Trump wants another term. Right. Already.
Yes, I think he wants another term for sure.
I mean, he's in January 2017, he formed his re-election committee.
Right.
He already has a campaign manager.
Yes.
He's already holding rallies.
Yes.
I mean, the rallies that were held this year, they were ostensibly for Republican candidates for Senate, but he made it pretty clear they were all about him.
Yes.
People actually had Trump 2020 signs they were holding up.
Yes.
Yeah. And the new slogan was "Keep America Great Again."
Right. A tweak from the "Make America."
Okay, so he's running in the Hill newspaper. Recently, they took a poll shortly after the midterms, which showed that 70% of Americans would like to see a challenger to Donald Trump in the Republican primary. The question is, who? Any ideas?
Yeah, I think there are some people mulling a potential challenge to him. Jeff Flake is somebody I would put high up on the list, along with John Kasich, who just so happens to be in New Hampshire today. Just kind of, making a friendly trip to New Hampshire to see, as he put it, old friends and make some new friends. So those two people I would put high on the list. At least I've talked to some people in Kasich's world. He's interested in it. He doesn't know if he's going to pull the trigger, but they definitely say that that's something that he's interested in. And I think since Flake decided not to run again, there's been speculation about him, ever since he made that decision. And the question, after that is there an appetite among Republicans broadly? You mentioned the poll, but there's also quite a lot of energy for Donald Trump on the Republican side still. So while I think some people might want a potential challenge to him, I think that overwhelmingly we're not necessarily going to see that. That could change depending on how investigations go and stuff.
Well, we
like
are
that.
talking about a Republican primary, right?
Yes.
So in a Republican primary, in the Republican Party, while Donald Trump's overall has still been in the low to mid 40s, 43% the last time I checked. Among Republicans, his popularity is 65, 70, 75%.
Yeah, and so I think that figure...
So a challenge in the Republican primary...
It's hard. It's hard for whoever takes that on. That's not to say that somebody like Flake, or Kasich, who have been in New Hampshire a lot in 2018, that's not to say there's no appetite for them there. They certainly might have pockets of support in some of the early voting states, but I wouldn't say that it's enough at this point to really ignite, overwhelming support, at least from what we've seen in 2018. And they've been out a bit.
It's hard to see. And of course, this presumes that Donald Trump will not be indicted before then, or impeached or whatever before then. Which I think is probably the case. Like you, I don't see anybody else on the horizon as a Republican.
Yeah. There was talk a little bit for a second about Nikki Haley potentially after stepping down from the UN, but I think that she quickly squashed that and said, I'm not running for any office in 2020. I'm just not doing it. I'm not going there. So I think that kind of made people were thinking, oh, maybe she'll do it. Maybe that's why she's kind of trying to step away from Trump. But I think that was quickly shut down.
And some people thought Mike Pence might.
Sure. Same kind of thing.
Yeah. Not
I don't think so.
So with a paucity of possible challengers to Donald Trump on the Republican side, the contrast is so many candidates, we could never remember them all if we tried to list them. A fellow political reporter told me the other day that she made a list and had 24.
Yeah, I think mine has 28.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Last time I made it. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a big field.
Forgive us.
I know.
How are we going to get through it?
I know.
Save us, I should say. Right.
I think people now, after the midterms, people are now starting to put them into groups, like the senators, the House, the representatives, the mayors, the governors, the outsiders. So they're kind of starting to be grouped in that way to keep track of them all. But there's a new person that emerges seemingly every day. So it's hard to remember everyone.
Well, you know what? That's a good way to approach it. So, first of all, I think governors make the best presidential candidates.
Historically, yes.
Historically,
and this time I did a story on that that very thing. How actually in 2018, governors who could potentially run were sort of subtly outshining the top tier senators who people thought were going to run, and it was basically the story focused on how they could be in a better position to actually show some of the executive actions that they took that kind of mirrored legislation that was going on in the Senate. And so while on the debate stage, if a top tier senator is saying, well, I introduced this bill, a governor is really well positioned to say, well, we already passed that as an executive action in my state. So like things like that where I think policy is going to come into the forefront more than perhaps, especially left-leaning policy. I think the governors who've actually made good on some of the litmus tests floating around in the party in the Senate, that might resonate with some people who like to see the results.
No, absolutely. They get things done.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
And they don't have that baggage of all these votes that they've had to cast
the shifting and the
on a lot of others. So, but there are not that many Democratic governors to begin with. They had 7 I think 15 before the midterms. They picked up another 7.
Yes.
We don't know, but at least 7. It'd be nice to get another one, maybe in Florida. But okay, so among governors, the ones who are out there who might, Jay Inslee from Washington. I'm going to get up to your 28 here. I'm going to keep track. Jay Inslee from Washington, right?
Yep.
And
he's quite interested in running.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yep.
And then there's is it Burke from Montana? No, not
Steve
Burke.
Bullock.
Bullock from Montana, right?
He's high on my list. He's high on my watch list.
Because I never heard of him. I mean,
so I hadn't heard of him until about a year or so ago. He's the chairman of the National Governors Association, so he was actually the one who sort of helped orchestrate a lot of these wins for governors in 2018. So he'll be promoting that. And he's also been all over the country this year in that capacity, but also kind of testing the waters for himself. And so he's done nearly everything that somebody can do to prepare for a presidential run. And people seem to like him. I've talked to a lot of people in different states who seem to like that he's kind of like a Wild West type of guy. You know.
So he's got a big problem. He's also from Montana.
He's from Montana. That's the problem with him. But, you know, I
know. I'm from Delaware. 3 electoral votes. Montana has 2 maybe or 3, right? I mean, it doesn't give you a big base to start with.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But I think that that's also, I think he kind of sees that and that's why he went after the NGA chairmanship as a way to kind of say, you know, no, I have 0 name recognition, but I have 2 to 3 years to travel the country and do that.
And so then we have Deval Patrick from the former governor.
Yes.
Other current governors? I don't think so. You know, Andrew Cuomo. You would think, but he's not really on anybody's list, is he?
He won easily a third term, so that he has that going for him. He had to move a lot further left than he has from his challenge.
Have you seen anybody talking about him for president?
I think there's always a little bit of speculation about him, but I don't think he's a top tier person on anyone's list at the moment.
Yeah, there are people talking about him running for president.
He is.
Him.
Right.
Yeah. And people in New York, you know, I mean, so it's like, what is it, you know, are people nationally talking about him? No. And then I would add John Hickenlooper to the list of that.
Right. And I would also, who will be soon former governor of Colorado, and I would also add Terry McAuliffe.
Oh, yes. And yep.
So,
although I would put him in the Cuomo category of are people talking about him? Maybe he's kind of more of the one ginning up that. But yeah.
So that's 6 on and we might have forgotten a couple. So then we get to senators.
Yep.
All right. In no particular order, right?
Okay.
You've got, just as they pop into my head, Cory Booker, I don't know why he comes in first, Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris. You'd have to say Sherrod Brown.
Sherrod Brown, yeah.
Huh? I mean, people are, there's a little buzz about him.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren.
Gee, how about that? Elizabeth Warren.
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Oh, right, that guy.
Hey, that guy, right? We forgetting anybody? Booker, Klobuchar, Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders.
No, that's it for the senators.
Yeah, I can't think of any others.
Amy Klobuchar is always the one that people tend to forget.
Right.
But
and should not. Right?
Yeah, no. I think she's a very good senator, to say the least. But
so that's only 13.
Okay.
Then we get to the outside. Well, no.
The
then
mayors.
we get to the let's say,
or the reps. Yeah.
I was just going to say the statesmen, sort of.
Okay.
Or the party elders.
Oh, okay.
Which would have to be Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden.
Anybody else? I don't think so, unless it was Hillary, but no.
Yeah, I would just put Biden in.
Biden in there. And then the outsiders, right, are...
Well, don't forget the representatives. Because there's a lot of those.
John Delaney.
Oh, no. House.
You've been running for 2 years already.
Seth Moulton.
Tim Ryan.
Yeah. Eric Swalwell.
is Seth Moulton actually talking about it?
I think he's thinking about it. He's taken a lot of steps.
Eric Swalwell.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Really? Okay.
Yep. She's been to Iowa maybe half a dozen times, New Hampshire a few times. I think those are that's it for the reps. Yep. Mayors.
And then, yeah.
Because there's 4 or 5 mayors.
Well, boy, the mayors include, of course, Eric Garcetti of L.A.
Yep.
And Mitch
Landrieu.
Yeah.
I would put Pete Buttigieg on there.
Really?
He's been out there a lot. He's not on people's radar yet, but he's made a lot of moves under the scenes. And then there was one.
He's a good guy. He's been a guest in the studio with us.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy.
Ran for DNC chair.
Yeah.
Mayor of South Bend.
South Bend. Yep.
South Bend. Yeah.
And then there's with Bill de Blasio, but we don't have to include him.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. And then I keep getting to the outsiders.
Yes.
Did we mention Michael Bloomberg?
Oh,
yet?
sorry, Michael Bloomberg. I knew there was
Bloomberg?
another.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Michael Bloomberg. Thank you.
Again, one of those guys who, when you listen to all the people crying for Michael Bloomberg to run, it really comes down to just him.
I thought of him when we were talking about Cuomo, but I knew to save him for the mayor section.
Yeah. Okay. And then for the outsiders, we do have Richard Ojeda.
Yes. The outsiders are my favorite category.
Totally.
Tom Steyer, Richard Ojeda, and our former
Avenatti.
friend, Michael Avenatti.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, God.
We've talked about him a bunch on the show.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure if there are other outsiders off the top of my mind.
Okay.
Oprah's name is still out there, for what it's worth.
I don't know.
I sort of think that's right. I don't think it's real, but there was that weird bump where people thought she might, and then she said she wasn't, and then she was campaigning for Stacey Abrams. So who knows?
Yeah.
Well, just for the record, with the ones we mentioned, at 7, 12, 13, 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
26.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty bad, but it's also.
No, I was going to say,
and I think we're forgetting some. I think we're forgetting
I know.
2 to 3 people, but they'll probably come to me.
Frankly, Oprah's as real as some of the other people on this list.
Oprah's more real than Richard Ojeda.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. She's more real than half of the senators.
Right.
Too.
Right.
Right. So one would say that he came so close last time. He almost, and maybe without superdelegate.
Oh, Martin O'Malley. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh,
he's
no.
actually taken a lot of steps.
Yeah,
he has.
He's got to be on the list.
He has. Yep. Sorry, just kidding.
Oh,
when you said he came so close last time, it sparked my memory to say him.
That's so cruel. How could we forget Martin?
I know. He's very nice. I've talked to him a bunch about what he's been doing, and he's been up to a lot.
He's also forgettable.
Yeah, he is, but he's a nice person.
No, he is, and he's right on the issues. And
Eric Holder too.
Oh, Jesus!
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm just.
We can just keep going.
Oh my God, my mind is like programmed to that. But Eric Holder actually has taken quite a few steps, so I would put him on the list.
Put him up in the elders.
Yeah,
You mean
Obama
former,
world? Yeah.
Okay, there you go. That's 28.
I knew there was 28.
Stop.
Okay, I won't say any more.
No, if any pop in, I want to hear them. But,
Okay.
Oh, geez. Wow. Where I was going was.
You were saying he came so close last time.
Yeah, he came so close last time. He without superdelegates, he would have been the Democratic nominee. So why doesn't Bernie Sanders just get it by acclamation?
He's definitely going to run. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that he's going to run.
Shouldn't he be automatically number one?
I think he has a lot of support still that I think people don't acknowledge enough. I always kind of look at it, I hate to say rally size, but when you're comparing just sheer name recognition, ability to draw crowds, I mean, he was out in the midterms more than almost anyone next to Biden, and he drew just as big of crowds as he did when he was running for president. So, that's one indication. Obviously, like, Kamala Harris or Cory Booker also draw big crowds because there's more intrigue with them. But I think it's wrong to dismiss somebody who has built-in support. Now, that's not to say some of that support can't go to Elizabeth Warren or some other people, but he definitely has support, and he has the advantage of having the party platform move in his direction, which I think a lot of his supporters will remind people during the election.
And one can make the same argument about Joe Biden.
Same thing.
I mean,
same type of thing.
Former vice president. I do believe that had he run in 2016, he could have taken the nomination away from Hillary because she was really floundering toward the end. And I think he would have taken away from Bernie because he was like Mr. Democrat, but certainly Bernie was not. And he's a progressive, not as progressive as Bernie, but progressive, and I think was a great vice president and has a great record in the Senate, head of Senate Judiciary, head of Foreign Relations. So if Biden were, and he certainly is making all the moves of running, were he to declare, he would be automatically the front runner, no? I
think so too. I think, and a lot of, we've seen early polling, which is like almost ridiculous to look at. Yeah. But it is the name recognition thing where like they're very much, it's very much Biden and Bernie are the top two people right now. And it's the same kind of thing, like you were saying, he has the support of everybody who sort of longs for the Obama White House and people who knew him back when he was in the Senate. And then also the chance to kind of emerge to people who are younger, like 18-year-old voters who might not have known him except for the context of Obama. So a chance to kind of, introduce himself again to younger people.
There was a time, not that long ago, when a candidate as old as Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or even Elizabeth Warren would not be considered.
Yeah.
Bernie kind of took the age issue out of play, didn't he?
I think he did, just by the nature of the supporters that he was able to attract. Most of his supporters were younger people. So that says something, and also the second time around, people often say to me, do you think his age is an issue? Do you think it's same with Biden? Do you think his age is an issue? And to me, it's like people know their age going into it. So nobody is going to be surprised that they are their age that they are. So I think they already still have support. And people know their age, so it's not like a surprise thing where somebody might find out and say, now I can't support you because you're 1 year older than I thought you were. It's kind of, to me, it's a non-starter. For some people, it might matter, but for this core supporters, like with Biden or Bernie, I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Right. No, I agree. So it is off to the races, and we apologize. I know we would all like some time out. We all deserve some time out. I think there should be a time when you could just govern in between elections. But to do that, you have to have a time out in between elections.
Right.
We haven't had that for a while. We're not going to have it this time. So deal with it. I guess that's what we have to do. Thanks so much, Hannah, for coming in.
Thank you for having
me.
me.
Great to see you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.
And to all of you as well, thanks for joining us. Have a great break, great holiday, and we'll see you next time.
That's all for the America's Democrats podcast. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Justin Guest, Karen Hobert Flynn, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. For the America's Democrats podcast, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.